Thank you for listening to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. Sign up to our Patreon to receive bonus content, live streams, and our weekly newsletter with money off books and museum visits as well, plus early access to all live show tickets. That's patreon.com/wehaveways.
It was not until dusk, when the great fires of Dockland reddened the sky, that most people realised the battle for London had started in earnest, and that the silver specks we had watched at tea time had been fighting for the mastery of the capital. The day raiders had gone home by 6, after dropping bombs on Woolwich Arsenal, on the gasworks at Beckton, on the docks at Millwall, on the docks at Limehouse and by Tower Bridge, at Rotherhithe, on the Surrey docks, and on the West Ham power station. At 8:10 exactly, the night raiders appeared, and by then the docks on both sides of the Thames were blazing furiously. All that night, the sinister glow deepened under the enemy's ruthless bombing, and only paled before the slowly approaching dawn. That, of course, was Madeleine Henry, talking about Black Saturday, Saturday the 7th of September 1940, and the start of the Blitz.
So, welcome to We Have Ways of Making You Talk with me, Al Murray, and James Holland. And this is our series about the Blitz in London. Well, and the Blitz in the UK, because we're going to touch on elsewhere, aren't we, Jim?
Yep, there's a little bit of Merseyside, there's a little bit of Glasgow, Swansea, Plymouth.
This is quite an interesting departure for us, because you've written about the Battle of Britain, but you've not really looked into the Blitz, have you, Jim?
Well, I did sort of very cursorily when I was doing the War in the West Volume 1 and when I was doing my Ladybirds, but I haven't gone into it in any depth. I've got to say, it has been A, completely eye-opening, B, utterly fascinating. I'm totally obsessed with it now. I think that what's coming through really, really strongly, and we'll obviously get into it in great detail, but is just the shock of it when it finally started, and the scale of the destruction is much greater than I'd appreciated.
Okay. I mean, I think as a prelude, it's worth just discussing briefly why it takes, because after all, the Germans have been quite comfortable with bombing. They bomb Warsaw, they bomb Rotterdam, but there's a sort of, is nervousness the right word, or hesitation in bringing bombing to London, isn't there, on the part of the Germans? And a lot of this is to do with the fact that Hitler sees it purely as bombing for its terror effect, doesn't it? That's the prism he views it through is purely political, isn't it?
Well, I don't think it's purely political, because I think he does think, let's hit industrial targets and minimise Britain's ability to kind of wage war effectively. But I think the reason he's been cautious up until that point is because, he quite likes Britain. He likes what Britain does. He sees Britain as the most dangerous enemy. He's always said that. Or England, as he calls it. But I think there is a kind of sort of respect there. And I think what he wants is a peaceable solution where a kind of hard right British government sits hand in glove with the Germans and they do business together globally. And so destroying it isn't really massively in his interest at that point.
And also, basically, this isn't a campaign they ever imagined they'd be fighting. That's the other issue. If there's hesitation around what the Germans do, sort of dithering about how to concentrate their effort, it's because they were hoping that Fall Gelb would work, that the invasion of France would work, but they never imagined it to cause France to topple in 6 weeks, and to now be in a situation where they're fighting Britain on its own and within the Luftwaffe. So Beppo Schmidt thinks we need to blockade the blockader, don't we? Is his view.
Yeah. Beppo Schmidt is one of the Luftwaffe's intelligence chiefs, but also is on Goering's personal staff. So although he's only a colonel, he outranks General Martini, who is a general. I mean, it's just classic.
I think that'll do for prelude, because it starts sort of with this trickle of bombs on the 24th of August. And by September, it is a torrent, isn't it? And you also have this peculiar tit for tat that's sort of tiptoeing around it that starts things off. Because after all, Bomber Command, which is founded to be a separate part of the RAF, it's answerable to no one, is set up before the war, but not really. It has aspirations, hasn't it, Bomber Command? Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
It's got high hopes.
Yeah, it hasn't quite realised those aspirations, those high intentions yet.
No. And at the moment has no chance of doing so, but is nevertheless able to strike Berlin. And the Luftwaffe have been forbidden from dropping bombs on London.
Well, yeah, but A, because, they don't want to get into this situation of doing civilian terror attacks. B, because their targets are RAF airfields. They're trying to knock out the RAF. They're not trying to kind of destroy London. That's the reason why they haven't up until this point. And then on the 24th, by accident, bombs are dropped on, I think it's sort of up near Islington. And immediately the British government, the War Cabinet and the wider cabinet all agree that they should go off and, do a tit for tat. And it has to be said that Bomber Command has been striking German targets since the 17th of May.
Yeah.
Albeit not massively effectively.
Trying to.
Yeah. But first bombs dropped on Germany are fallen by RAF Bomber Command on the 17th of May.
I mean, it's marks out of 10 for effort rather than attainment, isn't it? For Bomber Command at this point.
Very much so. And I think the ineffectiveness of it is what has restrained the Luftwaffe from going earlier as well, going harder earlier. But the following night, they do hit Berlin on the night of the 25th, 26th of August. And, that is quite a shock to German people because they thought the war was over. Here they are landing on the capital. And then they do it another night. And then they do it 2 more times. So it's 4 times. And it's really interesting because on the 2nd of September, Goering orders the Luftwaffe to switch from attacking the airfields to striking London. And targeting Britain's industrial and transport hubs. Clearly the attack on the airfields isn't working for all the reasons that we've discussed in the past about kind of size of airfields and being grass, just filling in the potholes. The fact that we've got the air defense system, so they're in the air when they're coming over, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
The Germans just not knowing anything about anything is the truth.
Not knowing anything about anything, exactly. But it's not until the 4th of September that Hitler gives his Berlin speech where he says, they dropped 10 bombs, we'll drop 10,000, 4,000, all that kind of stuff. But obviously, Goering has checked it out with the Fuhrer before he starts making his plans on the 2nd of September. And then on the 7th of September, that is the day it's all going to kick off. Saturday, the 7th of September. And Goering gives a radio broadcast about it and about what they're going to do. So they're quite upfront about it. They say, this is how it's going to be.
He says, I now want to take this opportunity of speaking to you to say this moment is a historic one. As a result of the provocative British attacks on Berlin in recent nights, the Fuhrer has decided to order a mighty blow to be struck in revenge against the capital of the British Empire. I personally have assumed the leadership of this attack. And today I hear...
So that's all right then.
yeah, great. It's all going to work out fine then. I personally have assumed... I'll just put the morphine down. I personally have assumed the leadership of this attack, and today I hear above me the roaring, victorious German squadrons, which now, for the first time, are driving towards the heart of the enemy in full daylight, accompanied by countless fighter squadrons. I mean, the thing is...
Eddie, that's so much better.
This first effort, and again, this is one of the things that's striking about this. When we were talking about doing this the other day, you're saying, you're really shocked by the destruction. What this also serves to do is throw into further perspective what Germany's then on the receiving end of for the last 2 years of the war, doesn't it, really? Because this first raid, he says roaring victorious squadrons, countless fighter squadrons. That's not quite right, is it?
They're not countless.
No.
You can count them.
You can definitely count them.
Yeah, I think the largest raid of the entire Blitz is about 450 aircraft.
Yeah.
Which is a lot.
That's a lot
you
of
think the
planes.
Schweinfurt-Regensburg raid of 8th Army is 324 or whatever it is on August 17th, 1943. But, they're 2 engine bombers and not 4 engine bombers. It's and it's very, very small beer compared to what happens. But I think where you have to be careful about being too sort of snooty about the scale of the German raids because it's what the target is. If you're bombing a massive great bit of concrete, that's not going to do you an awful lot. But if you're bombing really, really old wooden docks covered in pitch,
they're going to go up. Yeah,
they're going to go up whether you've got 75 bombers or 175 or 750.
And the Germans favour using incendiaries over high explosives, don't they?
Well, they do a bit of both.
Well, yeah, but at this stage of the war, they're far more tilted to incendiaries than the RAF have been considering, haven't they? The fire is part of what they're trying to do. So Saturday, the 7th of September, the Blitz starts. Well, so the sirens sound in the late afternoon, don't they? So it's a 4:43.
Yeah, 4:43. So it's daylight. It starts with a daylight attack. And it's bombers of 1 Fliegerkorps aiming for target G, which is the London docks. And this is the bit in the big loop where...
EastEnders,
yeah. And the O2.
Yeah, EastEnders,
which, of course,
and the O2.
Back in the day was all docks, which is why it's now the O2, because... they're all destroyed in the war. That's why Canary Wharf is Canary Wharf, is because, again, it was all
smashed to pieces. Yeah.
It was all smashed to pieces, yeah.
And it's interesting, though, because the first bombs fall on the Ford Motorworks at Dagenham, followed by Beckton Gasworks. That's quite unarguably a military industrial complex target, if that's what they're trying to do. and easier to hit in daylight, of course. Then the Thames Bight at Woolwich Reach with 3 royal docks, their warehouses and sheds. All of these are hit, Silvertown, Canning Town, and docks all the way up to London Bridge. So, you consider that London is the trading imperial hub of the world. That is a direct blow at British power, isn't it?
It's absolutely amazing.
No two ways about it.
Yeah, because, we are much diminished these days, and you think of Little Britain and all the rest of it. But, London, as you say, is the epicenter of the world's largest empire.
Yeah.
And it is the epicenter of the largest trading empire the world has ever known. Because in addition to Dominion's empire, there are also large numbers of extra imperial assets around the world. So, much of South America, for example, is controlled by British businesses.
Yeah.
So the ant line of shipping goes all the way down there just as much as it does to India or to across the North Atlantic or around the Cape, et cetera, et cetera. So this is just so unthinkable. It's so unimaginable. And yet it's also at the same time, it's sort of inevitable because, from Douai onwards, people have been talking about this Armageddon that's going to come through the sky. Bomber will always get through, as Stanley Baldwin, the former British Prime Minister, famously said. And so there's an expectation for it. And yet I don't think we today can possibly comprehend the scale of the shock of seeing the capital of the largest trading empire in the world ever suddenly ablaze. And of course, the reason it's ablaze is exactly what we were saying earlier on. It's full of wooden warehouses covered in tar and pitch and creosote and everything that could possibly be flammable, and rope and heavy beams. And it's just absolutely ripe for the burning.
And rum, the rum key warehouses at West India.
Yes, and there's 200 acres of stacked timber, which is only just come in. I mean, 2.5 million tons of timber.
But rum at the West India Dock, that couldn't be any more symbolic of the fact this is an imperial centre. And after all, this is where Britain's power comes from. So this is a direct strike at British power, because we've talked before about how the war for shipping is everything. Well, if they're destroying your ports.
Yeah, your number one hub.
Your number one port, then that's a direct, that's a blow at Britain's advantage, which is that it's a global shipping hub.
And immediately scenes just that afternoon before it gets dark. I mean, it's just extraordinary because you've got burning spirits gushing out of the rum key. You've got tar distilleries flooded with molten pitch just seeping out absolutely everywhere. I mean, just imagine what that's like. And then rats swarm from a nearby soap works. It's like something out of a sort of awful Brothers Grimm fairy tale. The rubber factories hit. Acrid black smoke rolling through Silvertown. So Silvertown is basically where that's kind of just south of City Airport, just by the river. And, that smoke is mingling with the gas that has escaped from the Beckton gasworks. Fires are burning through the ropes of tethered barges, so barges are swimming out on fire. They're drifting out into the middle of the Thames. I mean, it's a scene from hell. I mean, it's just extraordinary.
Yeah. And this is the first time this has happened, is what it comes down to, isn't it?
It's the ultimate test for the fire services.
Well, it's the ultimate test, really, for the British government, because after all, British governments up to this point have been very, very nervous, terrified of the prospect of air raids, haven't they?
Yes.
They're worried about civil panic. They're worried about revolution, insurrection, aren't they? As much as they're worried about anything, aren't they?
Completely.
Because after all, if you're remembering 1918 and the collapse of German society at the end of the First World War into revolution, Germany, from a British point of view, an ordered civilization, not unlike, society not unlike your own, collapses into revolution. This is the kind of thing that might trigger that. And they're very, very, this is exactly the thing they're worrying about, isn't it?
And I think with good reason.
With excellent reason in the run up to the war. And then they come back after 8 p.m.
They do. They've got the main fire service, they've got the regular fire service, but then they're now joined for the first time properly by the auxiliary fire service, the AFS, and 4 substations on the docks. The trader pumps are kind of drawn by vans and taxi cabs. So 2,000 of them are hired at the start of the war for such purposes. As and when we're going to call on you, you've got to drop everything and come and become pump deliverers. So it is literally all hands to the pump. So the AFS has been launched in March 1938 when things are looking a little bit fruity, following the Anschluss and everything.
The slogan is very good, isn't it? Keep the home fires from burning. I mean,
yeah. I love it. It's certainly nothing. I mean, just imagine the ad man who came up with that one. And obviously, it's just, they are being tested to kind of unbelievable levels. what would happen is they'd kind of sort of get their pumps going and douse these burning warehouses. Flames would go out and then they'd just go, because of the heat was so great, they'd just come straight back up again.
Yeah.
Grain spilling from warehouses and that's burning and it's getting all sticky. And
so the oil in the grain.
God. Oh, God, can you imagine? But that's just all that destruction so far. That is just the first raid. As you say, they come back after 8 p.m., about 10 past 8, as Madeleine Henry said in that opening quote we had, and they just keep coming, and they're coming in a stream, not in a formation. So they come over in little staffel and half staffel of sort of 6s and 9s and whatever, and they just keep going, and it's the East End that gets hammered. But also Chelsea and Victoria hit. It's only about 250 bombers. I say only, but again, compared to kind of what's to come later on in the war, it seems like nothing, and only 625 tons as well. But that is a lot.
Yes,
if you think to put that into each one into a, you think in terms of tons and what that looks like.
And it's not necessarily about that, is it? It's about what you're striking. And also, I mean, the contributory factor is that water mains are being shattered all over, and gas pipes and telephone cables. So you've complications of the attacks. I mean, it's interesting, isn't this? Because it's reality now. Up to this point, it's been theory, it's been things people have been planning for, it's been things people have been anticipating and very, very nervous about. And now here it is happening. And the difficulties of arguing themselves, aren't they? Is the situation that London finds itself in.
Completely. The impression you get is that first night is just completely overwhelming. And as you say, one of the problems is once you've got the telephone lines are down and all the rest of it, how do you communicate from one fire brigade to another and, get reinforcements and all the rest of it? Well, the solution of the Gilman's Devils, this is something that's already been organised, is already in hand by a chap called Bill Gilman, who's the assistant controller of operations at West Ham, and he gets all these teenage boys to become dispatch riders, either on motorbikes if they're old enough to do it, or on bikes, and the bikes are sort of painted distinctive yellow, so they sort of stick out in the night and everything. 16 is the kind of statutory age in which they're allowed to do this, but there's plenty who are younger. And, just this image of these young sort of ragamuffins hurtling around, dodging the falling masonry and fires and stuff is just extraordinary. There's one 16-year-old who finds himself cycling through a patch of burning paint in Silvertown, and the paint catches on his tyres, which then start to burn. So he rides on very fast along the pavement until the flames go out and keeps going. And he goes, you go around a corner and there'd be a great big hole in the end of the road where a bomb had fallen, or half a house had fallen on the debris was blocking the road, or there might be an unexploded bomb. But that night when I reported for duty, you didn't know where to look. The chemical works had been hit. Everywhere you looked was fire. Across the water, north, south, east, west, everywhere. It seemed as if the whole East End docks were on fire. It was unbelievable, says Stan Durling, who was an AFS dispatch rider.
This sort of impression of it being you're just not knowing anything about anything.
It is absolute inferno that hasn't been seen since 1666.
Yeah. And so obviously this is the organised response to the Blitz, the bombing we're talking about. The public, they don't know what to do. Some are in their Anderson shelters, others are going to public shelters. There's tube stations, and people don't know how to react, do they? To start with.
Well, yeah. So people have been preparing for the bombing and when it comes, but it hasn't been tested. That's the point. So they don't know whether those preparations are the right preparations. And you're right. You've got all these Anderson shelters. That's great if you've got a garden. But if you're in a sort of East End tenement, then chances are you haven't got one. In which case you're dependent on shelters. And the shelters, frankly, are just not up to it. A lot of them are above ground shelters. So they're kind of, a brick wall with flat roof. Pretty basic, or there might be a church hall, or there might be a church crypt, or it might be a school gymnasium or something like that. But I mean, there's nothing to stop them being hit. So it's, these are not deep underground bits of concrete, put it that way.
A friend of mine has one in his back garden here in Chiswick. That's just a brick. It's just a brick structure. It's just another house.
Yeah. And, there is absolutely chaos in the East End. And people are huddling down streets and finding kind of dead bodies all over the place and bits of bodies. So there's one ambulance crew at Moorgate is called out and they see several bodies and bits in the street. So they stop, sort of put on the brakes, slam on the brakes, put all the parts to one side of the road, cover them with sheets of corrugated iron and then move on again. By kind of midnight from Tower Bridge, the riverfront and docks are continuously ablaze for 1,000 yards. The whole riverfront is just on fire, both sides of the river. And of course, for so many of these guys, this is their first taste of actual fighting. And, what they're taught is that a 35 pump fire was a large one, but they're now facing blazes that need 100 pumps more. So it's just off the radar in terms of the scale of it. And by the early hours of the 8th of September, that Sunday, that first Sunday of the Blitz, there's 42 fires raging and 300 pumps fighting just one blaze and 130 needed at another. So there's an urgent call out for ever more vehicles, 1,000 fire engines in the docks alone that night and 500 in West Ham. I mean, it's
incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, it is absolutely incredible. And just there is a sense, I think, of everyone just shell-shocked by what is happening. And whatever they've prepared, it's not enough.
Yeah.
This sort of awful feeling that actually they've been called out here and that this is on a scale to which no one has imagined.
And at the same time, there's an invasion panic going on, isn't there? So Op Cromwell, which is the imminent invasion signal, goes out to East and Southern Command troops, saying that it's on. And unfortunately, lots of Home Guard commanders took this to mean there actually was an invasion, start ordering church bells to be rung. I mean, this is one of the sort of circular questions of the Second World War, is how seriously was the threat of invasion taken in London by the chiefs of staff? What did they really think about the prospect of a German invasion? Well, here they are signalling that they might happen. So
they're taking it fairly seriously.
Plenty of people who believed it was a possibility.
There is a bit of sort of panic, though, that night, because what happens is Cromwell is signalled, which is that an invasion is considered imminent. But for many people, that is interpreted by Home Guard battalions as it is happening. And so they start ringing church bells and everyone sort of jumping around and crowing around and taking pot shots at any car that's moving and, et cetera, et cetera. Alan Brooke, who is the commander of Southern Command, is pretty annoyed by the whole thing. And they kind of sort of tighten up things for the future. But meanwhile, the docks of Bermondsey and West Ham, they're completely destroyed. Just unspeakable damage at Stepney, Whitechapel, Poplar, Bow and Shoreditch. But what I think is quite amazing is, although a lot of people are killed and a lot of people injured, it could so easily be so much more. So 430 killed in that first night of the Blitz, first day and night of the Blitz, 1,600 injured. But it's the scale of the carnage. That's the thing. Just rubble everywhere, gaping holes where buildings have been, even whole streets, half destroyed homes with interiors sort of. I mean, it's like slicing a house in half, and there's all the wallpaper there, and a bed, and
like a sort of smashed up doll's house in a way.
Like a smashed up doll's house. Exactly.
It is. I mean, it is interesting, isn't it? Because they're still fighting fires for basically for the next 3 weeks. The London Fire Brigade and the AFS, they get into this. They get into the rhythm of this, don't they? They fight 10,000 fires over the next 3 weeks. It's just unbelievable.
And they have to learn incredibly fast. So, there's nothing like kind of experience to get you kind of honed, but, they work out how to employ inadequate resources, how to strategize the response to the calls, identify those of greatest risk and the ones that are most likely to spread and make hard decisions about neglecting those that are likely to burn out. And they're also starting to work out, how many pumps will be needed at what and what's the ones that are most likely to flare up and how best to get these blazes under control. But none of that is in place on Saturday the 7th and to the night of the 8th of September 1940. But it is very much, this is the start. And that's the pattern has been set for what's going to be the next 9 months.
Right. We will come back in a second for part 2, when we will look at Sunday, the 8th of September. You're listening to Weird Ways of Making You Talk. We'll see you in a second. Welcome back to Weird Ways of Making You Talk in our, I think, 4-part series about the Blitz that we're recording for you. 4 parts, right, Jim?
Yeah. It was going to be 2. Got a bit carried away.
Mission creep, yeah.
But what a story.
Well, yes, and we have talked a lot about the Allied bombing of Germany, but we've not done the boot on the other foot. So here it is. Sunday, the 8th of September, then. I mean, this is one of these occasions when Winston Churchill is lachrymose, isn't it?
Yes.
And he was someone who cried a lot, Churchill, actually. He was a teary man, interestingly. But I think this is one of these occasions where he's confronted with the destruction. He goes to the East End with Pug Ismay the next morning.
General Pug Ismay is his military advisor to the War Cabinet.
Yeah. And Ismay says, the destruction was much more devastating than I'd imagined it would be. Fires were still raging all over the place. Some of the larger buildings were mere skeletons. And many of the smaller houses had been reduced to piles of rubble. The sight of tiny paper Union Jacks, which had already been planted on 2 or 3 of these pathetic heaps, brought a lump to one's throat. I mean, this is really interesting that they do go and have a look, because something Hitler never, ever, 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 ever does.
They're down that morning. It's that morning. And Ismay's worried, and in this he totally reflects received opinion within the
within the British political establishment, military establishment, that the EastEnders will be worried. He's worried that they're going to be resentful, isn't he? That they're worried about civilian insurrection. Let's face it.
Yeah.
But, reports that they say, good old Winnie, we thought you'd come and see us. We can take it, give it him back and all that.
Give him back to Adolf.
I mean, this is only day one. So maybe 9 months later, people might be saying something slightly different. When they see Churchill crying. So you see, he really cares. God bless him, good old Winnie.
God bless you.
God bless you.
We're all right.
But it is significant that he does this, that he goes and has a look, isn't it? It's really, really important and interesting that he might do that.
Yes, and it's already starting to kind of develop this notion of the Blitz spirit and this sense of togetherness, and that we're all in it together. And this is total war now. This is total war. This is not war where you send armies over and they kind of line up on a hill and fire the other army
up until the other one runs away. Yeah,
this is upfront and personal. This is a people's war.
And after all, London was bombed in the First World War. You can't leave that out of this picture.
But it's worth pointing out here and now, more civilians are killed than soldiers until the middle of 1943.
Yeah. Well, after all, this is the 9th of September. The fighting is already over in mainland Europe for the British Army.
Yeah. It is true. So on the 8th, there's another 9.5 hours of bombing.
I mean, this thing of them coming in penny packets means it's relentless, doesn't it? It means there isn't one great big smash bang raid. It means it's relentless and uncoordinated is the wrong word, but unpredictable if you're on the ground. It's interesting because it amounts to an effective tactic, doesn't it? Is the truth. So on the 9th, at 8 p.m, the alert sounded. 600 bombed out EastEnders from Silvertown and Canning Town. Well, have taken shelter in South Hallsville Primary School in Agate Street, Canning Town.
But I mean, just think about the inadequacy of that.
Yeah. Well,
it's a school in Canning Town, which is right next to Silvertown, which means it's still in the East End, and it's in the flight. What on earth are they doing there? Yeah,
what on earth are they doing in a school?
And they're doing it because no one's thought this through properly, and no one's kind of quite anticipated what's going to happen. I think that if I'm honest, I think what they assume is if a street gets bombed out, so do all the people get killed in the process. And what's happening is they're not.
You also see the first breadcrumbs of the thinking that the Allies then take on, that you might not kill everyone, but you're going to dehouse them, disrupt them, give them a bad time if you do area bombing. What the Allies are being, or the British certainly are being presented with here, is a blueprint for their own action.
Exactly that.
Later in the war. King George VI, I mean, it's amazing. He comes down to visit, goes to Shoreditch, Bethnal Green, Stepney and Poplar. I mean, nowadays he'd be going around drinking incredible cocktails, wouldn't he, that cost 38 quid going to Shoreditch, Bethnal Green, Stepney and Poplar. But and he's shown an enormous crater in Bermondsey where 20 houses have been the previous night, which must be a gas main going up or something as well.
Yeah, I guess so.
And of course, Buckingham Palace is hit later
that day.
Yeah, by a random bomb. So while he's out.
Yeah, they've gone back to Windsor that night. But it shatters windows, including those of the King's study, where he'd been working the previous day.
And this leads to the Queen Mother being able to look the EastEnders in the eye and all that, doesn't it? That they've been bombed too. They've experienced it as well, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Then the 10th of September, this is relentless. So we're on our 4th day on the trot, aren't we? Which is, I suppose, a byproduct of the fact that the Germans having no strategy. They're improvising. So we'll just keep going. We'll just keep bombing.
We'll just keep going.
Yeah, and it has its own effect, doesn't it? The fact that they're improvising on this. The pressure's relentless. At 3:50 a.m., a single bomb hits South Hallsville School. The roof caves in, crushing people under slabs of concrete, burying them under layers of bricks.
Yeah, so this is the 600 people who've bombed out of Silvertown the previous day, who've gone to this school shelter, and they're still there on the Tuesday. And the big question is what the heck? Why are they there?
They've been collected? Yeah,
because a whole load of buses have been ordered to get them clear that day, and they haven't arrived. And the concern is that they've been sent to Camden Town, not Canning Town. But, there's no Agate Street in Camden Town. I mean, how do they get it wrong? And I think it's just one of those logistical cock-ups that doesn't happen because everyone's in a blue funk and because, everything's been thrown up into order. But the consequences of this is large numbers of people just unaccounted for. Officially, it's 73 killed at South Hallsville, but most people reckon it's at least 200, and some even reckon it's 450. And, ARP wardens and teams continue digging there for 12 days, trying to get through it. I mean, it is an absolute catastrophe. They've rebuilt the school, actually. It's
Really?
rebuilt now. Yeah, there's a modern school there now.
Is there a memorial
With a
there?
plaque
Yeah, there's a
and all
plaque.
the rest of
Good. Right, good.
Yeah, there
good.
is, yeah.
So, that's a big night, isn't it? 370 killed, 1,400 wounded. But, I mean, this is very interesting, this, isn't it, though? Because, as you said earlier, these incredibly densely populated places. But that doesn't sound like too many people.
No, I think everyone is expecting it to be
Far
10
worse.
times that number.
In terms of casualties.
There's tens of thousands of papier-mâché coffins that have been built, that are prepared and are in warehouses, ready for this, and they're not used. Just horrendous. Anyway, I thought we should probably look at German tactics and what they're doing and all the rest of it. So they have got quite sophisticated navigation aids. So they're generally using dead reckoning, which is winds and compass and all the rest of it.
Well, and also you have the advantage of flying over a coast that you can trace on your map and you're heading towards another coast.
And also the biggest guide is the Thames.
Well, the biggest guide is the Thames and also the previous night's fires. Getting lost would take some doing. Remember, there's no accuracy in this bombing. There's no pickle barrel Norden bomb site nonsense here.
No. There's no bomb site at all.
But the Germans have been realistic in that. And it's interesting that this is the thing they've spent their money on. The British will catch up, obviously, with oboe and things like that later on in the war.
And G and whatnot.
Yeah, and all those measures. But you've got Exec and Knickerbein, which are intersecting radio beams.
Yeah, so you have the two beams, and basically they are beamed out from one place like Cleve or Koblenz or wherever, and the beams are reported in the navigator and pilot's ears as a dot and a dash. So one side is a dot and the other one's a dash, and when they meet, you're on your target. That's basically how it works.
And curvature of the Earth comes into that there's a sweet spot where you can make this work, and then beyond it you can't.
Yeah, that's Knickerbein, and Excrate is basically the same principle, but it's more accurate, tighter radio frequency, harder to use, so only one bomber group has been trained on it at this point. And it used more transmitters called the Wotan, and this can deliver 180 directional signals per minute.
But only one bomber group's trained to use that, so it has its limits. And then there's Weiverhafen, which is, again, only with one unit, 3 kg-26, that comes in later on. It's interesting, isn't it? Because they're developing it, they're figuring it out, but the effect they're having is immense, isn't it? This is the thing. So if the prism you like to view the Second World War through is sort of boffins in labs, in white coats, twiddling with Bakelite knobs, this is your Second World War. It's just arrived.
This is very much your wheelhouse. And it's R.V. Jones, who's a scientist, he's working for Air Intelligence, who cracks Knickerbein. And he's cracked it by June, but it's one thing knowing it, you've then got to work out a countermeasure, which effectively means bending the beam. So the battle of the beams is the kind of thing that's going off in the kind of shadows, so to speak. But the idea is that when the German crew think they've reached their target before they have, so they're kind of, so they drop them on a field or whatever. This works very famously when the Germans try and attack the Rolls-Royce factory in Derby.
Yeah.
And they drop it, like in the Peak District or something.
Yeah. And they've nicknamed Knickerbein headaches, so their countermeasure is called aspirin, which takes us a long way from Wotan. Jim, what are R.V. Jones's names? He's always R.V. Jones. What is he?
He's Reginald.
Yes, he's a Reginald. There we go. So
that's why he's R.V. He's always just known as R.V.
He's always known as R.V., isn't he? And he lives a sort of charmed life, doesn't he? Popping up with ingenious solutions all over the war, doesn't he? I mean,
yes.
Extraordinary.
And being
character.
Quite thin.
Yeah, exactly. But he's always known as R.V., but he's Reg. Yeah. Reg Jones. It's slightly different when you call him Reg.
Don't call me Reg. Don't call me Reginald.
Reginald Victor Jones. So they're dropping, we talked about this earlier, they're dropping HE, but it's interesting, isn't it? Because the Germans have worked out, they've done the thinking here, haven't they? That you blast things and then you set fire to them, right?
Yes. They don't call it HE, they call it SC. Sprengbomber cylindrisch.
Which is made of thin steel to maximise the blast. And they've got the Jericho trumpet, so the cardboard tube, so yeah. Isn't bombing people enough? That's a bit it's a bit Screaming Eagle, isn't it? It's a bit like you're an eagle, isn't that? Isn't that enough?
Why can't it just be eagles?
Why can't it just be eagles? Why does a bomb have to whistle menacingly as well as fall on you and blow up?
Why can't they be hawked eagles? Or
dashing eagles,
Dashing eagles.
But 110-pound bombs and then a 2,200-pound bomb called the Hermann after Goering.
That's Goering because it's quite sort of squat and plump.
Chunky. Yeah.
And chunky.
And then there's the Satan. This is... when you think
if that was British, it'd be called Eric or something.
Well, tall boy, Grand Slam and all that, like cookies and all that. But this is Satan. This is a proper "Are we the bad guys" moment, isn't it? We're dropping Satans on London.
But the Satan enough is big enough to create a crater that could fit in several London buses. But the biggest one ever is the £5,500 max. See, I wasn't aware that the Germans had a piece of ordnance that was quite as big as that, because I didn't think they had a bomber that could take it. But £5,500 is 2.25 tons.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the upper limit of what a Heinkel can take.
That's all they're carrying, isn't it? In that case, you're just dropping the one.
Although, to be fair, I think, a single max is probably more than enough for one plane.
Yeah. And a lot of them don't go off.
About 10%.
Some have delayed action mechanism. So you've got the sort of disruption with unexploded bombs that's intentional and unintentional.
Yeah, and let's face it, we still have disruption from unexploded bombs. There's that massive one that was found in Exeter the other day.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, the other day, it's probably about 2 years ago, but you know what I mean.
Exactly. And that's left to the Royal Engineers to sort out. Then you have parachute mines, which are designed for maximum destruction, widespread destruction.
So they literally just land on the ground and then just go, you know, and they're enormous and maximum superficial, surface damage.
And then incendiaries, which are 9 inches long and made of magnesium alloy.
So I think it's a parachute mine that lands on South Hallsville School.
Oh, really? And then you've got incendiaries which burn for 10 minutes and chuck particles up to 50 feet.
Yeah, bits of molten magnesium.
I remember my mum talking about someone she knew who was on the roof of St. Paul's, with a bucket and a blanket, and all that.
And a stirrup pump.
Yeah. Looking for incendiaries falling on the roof of St. Paul's. That was the thing they were worried about more than anything else. And we've talked about the sort of electronic counter warfare. But the actual solid defences that the British have in place, the key issue is once you've switched to nighttime bombing, you're buggered, aren't you? The Observer Corps can't see.
So all this time, incidentally, daylight tax is still coming out. I mean, Saturday the 7th is 8 days before Battle of Britain Day, Sunday the 15th of September. So Fighter Command is still doing its bit and shooting down planes by day. But it's no good for, it's just not designed for nighttime operations. And this is where Dowding is now absolutely sweating, and he's working around the clock to try and find solutions. Observer Corps can't see at night. Yeah. Picking up a huge raid on a radar doesn't really help if there isn't accurate AA fire or night fighters to intercept them, even if you can pick them up. I mean, it's sort of relevant. So there is this sense that you're sort of totally inert.
You're snookered by it, completely snookered
by it.
Yeah. Because they haven't got a radar-equipped fighter aircraft.
They're trying to do instrument only.
Yeah.
They are developing the cavity magnetron, as we mentioned before, in November 1940. But, there's one thing inventing it, there's another thing kind of putting it into practice. And putting it into practice, because the cavity magnetron is designed for picking up U-boats primarily and enemy vessels at sea, not enemy bombers. So there's all that. And, there's no question that Dowding is absolutely run ragged by this. And when he's sort of moved on, it's because of this rather than anything else.
Yeah. It's very interesting, isn't it? Because so much of this is about showing that you're trying, isn't it?
You're trying to do something.
They're trying to do something. So General Sir Frederick Pyle, who's the GOC anti-aircraft command.
Who's a really, really top bloke, by the way. I mean, he's really good. Holds his post throughout the war.
Yeah, he had one job and he did it.
Yep.
He realises that what you actually need to do is make a show, or insists that you make a show of defending London for the civilians, for the population.
And there is quite a lot of grumbling in the first few days. Where are our guns? And the reason, and they haven't really been firing. The reason they've been firing is they don't want to shoot down their own aircraft.
Yeah. So they make sure that fighters don't operate over London.
Well, because there's no point, because they're not achieving anything.
Exactly. And the thing is it has the effect, doesn't it? The gunners feel useful. They're doing something rather than sitting on their hands waiting. And civilians hear the guns, and it's this sort of feedback loop of showing that you care, almost.
Yeah. I love the fact that he gathers all the senior anti-aircraft officers together in the signals drill hall on the Brompton Road.
Yeah.
And says, right, listen in, men, this is what we're going to do. Every gun should fire every possible round. No fire is to be over hell. Just keep firing all night. And they do.
So we come now to, it's a Friday the 13th, right?
That's not good, is it?
It's not a good sign. And the palace is hit again by 2 bombs in the inner courtyard.
Oh, this is brilliant. This is absolutely brilliant. So the Queen is removing an eyelash from the King's eye when they hear the bomber. And the King just goes, a German. Then the bomb goes...
Yeah, of course.
And down it goes.
They have to whistle, yeah.
And the Queen goes, I saw a great column of smoke and earth thrown up into the air. Then we all ducked like lightning into the corridor. There was another tremendous explosion, and we and our 2 pages who were outside the door remained for a moment or two in the corridor away from the staircase, in case of flying glass. It is curious how one's instincts work at these moments of great danger, as quite without thinking, the urge was to get away from the windows. Everybody remained wonderfully calm, and we went down to the shelter.
Yeah.
I mean, of course you're going to get away from the windows.
Yes, yeah.
State the bleeding obvious.
I mean, well, they're different to you and me, the Royals, Jim. Remember that.
Yeah.
But this actually meant that they were the same as everyone. And, we touched it earlier, that she could look the East End of the eye now because of this.
Yes. That's become a sort of meme, hasn't it? It's it's like a trope rather. But actually, I think there is some real point in that.
And you look at the other side, because she then that afternoon goes to see the remains of the South Hallsville School, where all those people were killed. This is the opposite of how the other side respond to being bombed, isn't it? Let's be honest now, that this is the thing Hitler would hide underground from or go to a faraway headquarters in the middle of nowhere to avoid.
Yeah, no, I don't think you can't doubt their courage.
Yeah.
And they do stay then. They don't send the princesses to Canada or anything like that. They absolutely think it's vital that they come. And the king is completely energized by this. He puts on his military uniforms and he, later on in the war, he tours all around the front line and stuff, which is a dangerous business if you're king, flying around and all the rest of it. Having said that, though, when you look at the bomb damage maps, I mean, Chelsea, South Kensington, it's not getting it quite as bad.
No, of course not. But if you're a Heinkel pilot, you get over London, you think, right, that'll do. You're not going to go any further than you strictly feel you might need to.
Pressing the release button now.
Exactly. And I'm going home.
And then I can go return to the Heimat.
Then it's Battle of Britain Day, 2 days later, Sunday the 15th of September, which is the height of the Battle of Britain fighting. But by no means, I mean, this is the interesting thing, isn't it? Is that we tend to think of the Battle of Britain reaching its climax and then tailing off. But actually what that means is that the fighter action, daylight fighter action, is coming to an end, coming to its crescendo. And what we're going to get then is months more Blitz, actually.
Yeah.
That's the thing that Fighter Command can't actually counter, can't deal with, have got no answer to. I
mean, I do think the launch of the Blitz is a signal that the whole strategy for the Battle of Britain, for Adler and Griff, is completely gone to pot. I mean, they are not going to be doing an invasion. And, Hitler doesn't postpone it until late September and then again in October and then finally not until the 9th of January 1941. But, it's not happening. From the 7th of September, it's not happening.
No. That's right.
The start of the Blitz signals the end of any invasion attempts. It's just not going to happen because you can't destroy RAF airfields if you're bombing London.
No, you can't do it because there's not enough Luftwaffe. And the 15th is when the Junkers crashes on Victoria Station. Not a Heinkel HE-111 like in the Battle of Britain movie. Is that the one that's rammed?
Yes. Ray, what's his name? Goes through it with his Hurricane. He runs out of ammunition, so he just slices off the tail. And bails out himself, obviously.
God.
It's a very impressive action. I'm a bit surprised you didn't get the VC for that, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
And you don't get many VCs when you're winning.
No, you don't. No, what you need to do is lose if you want to dish them out.
But there is one terrible story, and I'm sort of conscious we've been talking a lot about 600 killed here and, warehouses ablaze and talking about it. But there is one family of 6 that are sheltering in a Anderson shelter in the garden of a small terraced house in Barking, and the bodies are literally blown apart. And a torso of one of the families lands on the roof of the family home. A woman's arm is found with an engagement ring, and this is a 20-year-old girl who's been in the Anderson shelter who's due to have been getting married the following Saturday. And the ARP warden who's then sends off a colleague to go and get potato sacks from a local grocer, which they fill with body parts. Yeah, it's just the mortuary van then turns up and that's a hastily painted black dust card. I mean, it's just, it's terrible. Absolutely terrible.
Yeah.
But this is the end of most major bombing raids. 15th of, the bombers do still come over in daytime, but this is the end of it, really. It's a switch to night. They lose 56 aircraft that day. And when you consider how few they lose, they lose less than that at night between the 7th of January and the 31st of December 1940. They do something like 25 or something.
Right, okay. So, a worthwhile switch for them in terms of aircraft and crews.
Well, it is if you're trying to preserve your bombers, but it's not if you're trying to do an invasion.
Well, yes, in the end, it's plain demonstration of the limits of German power, basically, isn't it?
Yeah, massively. Tuesday, 17th of September, Oxford Street is hit on that night. The D.H. Evans department store is hit, and so is Bourne and Hollingsworth. And actually, my greatest mate, Giles, his surname is Bourne, and Bourne and Hollingsworth was their family business.
Really? And John Lewis is burned out completely?
Yeah, looking like a charred skeleton with its blackened walls and gaping windows and rust-orange girders and its wax models lying like corpses in the street. And now it's the end of September.
Yeah.
Battle of Britain Day's been and gone. The Battle of Britain, from the point of view of the Battle of Britain, the Spitfire summer is over. Britain has been saved. It's, Battle of Britain is, as we've talked about in the past, it's an amazing victory for the Allies. It does consign Germany to a long war, a long attritional war, which even in autumn of 1940 looks very unlikely that they can win.
Yeah.
And forces Hitler to bring forward his plans for the Soviet Union, which he's originally been, in his mind's eye, been thinking about kind of 1943, 1944, build up strength again, really, really hammer it. But he's now thinking already of the summer of 1941.
The Germans, they've tried everything really with Britain, haven't they? They've tried peace overtures, they've tried bombing London into submission and everything, and overwhelming the RAF. They've tried everything, and now they're sort of stuck in a pattern, aren't they? Because they need to maintain hostilities, but also they're trying to gather their strength for fighting, as you say, in the Soviet Union the following year. So it's a peculiar campaign because it's that follows, isn't it? Because they're not throwing good money after bad, but they're carrying on because that's what they're going to do rather than there's necessarily a plan to it, right?
Well, yes, and their plans are going to be further kind of thrown awry because number one priority is get the West out of the war as quickly as possible, get Britain out of the war, danger of lurking America on the other side of the Atlantic, which is clearly coming down on the Allied side of things. You need to get into the Soviet Union so you can get all those resources you need because you don't have access to the world's oceans. You need that Lebensraum. This is your own empire. The British Empire is actually all these overseas possessions, but it's going to be a landmass of the Soviet Union. But there's trouble brewing because at the end of October, Italy's gone into Greece and by the end of the year, it's looking really bad and they're not winning and they're going to need bailing out because Hitler can't afford to have his southern flank imperiled. So suddenly that's another drain on resources. There's Malta in the middle of the Mediterranean. Suddenly they're getting sucked into a whole Mediterranean campaign, which they never anticipated getting involved in at all. That was going to be left to the Italians, but, they can't be trusted, blah, blah, blah. So they're getting themselves into a right old pickle. The further time marches on, the more they're being pulled into it. And meanwhile, they're sustaining this huge aerial assault on Britain. The one thing we will say is in the winter of 1940 and into the first part of 1941, most of those bombers are not called upon elsewhere. So it means the focus can remain on hammering Britain. But there's going to be a point where they've got to stop. So they've got to do the maximum amount of damage in the minimum amount of time, which is what they're trying to do. And to be fair, they make a pretty good fist of it, I think.
Most definitely. Okay, so that's the end of part one of our investigation of the Blitz. If you want to listen to these all in one lump, then become officer class. Why not? You don't have to go to Sandhurst. All you have to do is go to our We Have Ways of Making You Talk Apple channel for the price of less than a pint, thanks to the budget. And everything's laid out all in order for you in subject matter and heading. Or go to the Patreon where there's stuff like live casts and also ticket offers on We Have Ways Fest 5, which is V for Victory, putting the fun into funf at some point next year on an undisclosed date. And of course, if you're a patron on the Patreon, you'll find out the date before everyone else. So thanks for listening. We'll be back with more Blitz in the next episode. Bye-bye.
Cheerio.